From the betting books favoring Jake Paul this time around to fans fighting over who the toughest man is, here are the predictions for the Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul fight. And if the bettors have any say in this, it looks like Jake's winning this one, because it's clear that Diaz is the underdog here. See, even though Jake's latest fight against Tommy Fury was also his first loss in the pro scene, but odds makers are still backing this Paul brother. And that's not too surprising, to be honest. Because you see, this is going to be Nate's first professional boxing matchup. And though he's a seasoned fighter, you really haven't seen him on this side of combat sports, right? So naturally, people are bound to be a little confused and underconfident in his abilities. And as for Jake himself, he's been going around telling everyone that he'll make sure Diaz's first outing in the boxing world will also be his last. Paul hopes to deliver a really crushing blow to his opponent, so crushing that Diaz won't be left with any choice but to go back to the UFC. Like, say what you will about Jake, but you can't deny the fact that he's proven himself to be a skilled boxer. Like, even huge fighters like Anderson Silva or Ben Askren couldn't defeat him. And if you think about it, Nate is in that same league, so who's to say he'll be any different? I mean, Askren's come forward himself, weighing in on his predictions for this fight, and he's with the odds makers on this one. Ben believes that Nate will lose horribly, and you gotta give him some credit here, because Ben has some firsthand insight on not just how it is to fight Paul, but specifically on Nate's position in this whole thing as well, since he's also an MMA fighter. And the former Bellator champion thinks that Nate has no chance here. He tweeted right after the fight was announced, writing that Diaz's fans are gonna cry real hard when Paul beats him. And if you don't believe Askren, maybe someone like Dustin Poirier can convince you, because he also has very similar thoughts here. Dustin spoke about that bout on the MMA Hour, saying that the fight wasn't going to be easy for either of the two. But he also said that Paul holds a significant advantage over his opponent because he's clearly bigger, faster, and not to mention younger than Nate.
You know, Jake's younger, bigger, faster. It's not an easy fight, you know, just because Nate's a grizzled veteran with a lot of experience. And Jake's a new guy who's on YouTube. You know, he's got the money and the amenities to surround himself with the best people and dedicate himself to fighting. And he's younger and more explosive. And I think Diaz's boxing is good for MMA. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, you can say stuff like Nate's a veteran and he's got a ton of experience, which is something Jake lacks. And you'd be right. I mean, who is Paul, really? Just some famous YouTuber who bought his way in here. But you see, Nate's experience isn't really going to help in the ring, because at the end of the day, as Dustin pointed out, it all boils down to the fact that Jake's got the money and the resources to surround himself with the best people and trainers and dedicate himself to fighting. And while Nate's boxing may be great for his fights within the MMA world, it's going to be a completely different case when he actually steps into the boxing ring. And Poirier isn't the only one saying this. UFC Hall of Famer Michael Bisping also appeared on the MMA Hour podcast, and he too had very similar predictions. Yeah, just like Dustin, Michael also knows that Paul's the more big and explosive guy, which is exactly why he picked Nate in the first place. And Bisping sees this whole thing as a major mismatch. So he believes that it won't take Jake more than 4 rounds to finish his opponent. And again, this isn't to say that Diaz is bad or anything. Not at all, because Michael knows that he's not someone to trifle with, and he can be an absolute force in that octagon. But at the end of the day, he's just not a boxer, is he? And hey, take it from a former pro boxer himself, someone like Tony Bellew, who's also in Jake's camp. And Bellew did admit that while Paul can talk a lot of BS, he's also just as willing to back it up with his performance in the ring. And in this case, Tony fully expects Jake to win here, because to him, Nate isn't even half decent in MMA, which is the sport he's actually been in all his life. And if you're not even half good in the octagon, well, then you really don't have anything going for you in the boxing ring. And someone like that can make no difference to Paul, who, according to Tony, is a pretty decent boxer. Sure, he may not be as good as Bellew is, but he's a big guy who's going to have many physical advantages going in. Tony knows that if there's one thing about Jake, it's that he never makes matches to lose. He only agrees to one if he for sure knows that he can win. And he may have made a misstep against Tommy, but that's not going to happen in this case. And anyway, that fight was more of an ego contest between the two. This one is a proper match. That's going to end with Paul as the winner. That said, though, Tony isn't saying that the problem child will knock Diaz out or something. Nope. He knows that Nate is a very tough guy, and he won't just surrender like that. Let's be honest, if the guy could withstand the punches of someone like Conor McGregor, then Jake Paul is nobody. But Bellew thinks Paul would still win, just through points. So far, everything's been on Jake's side, right? But that doesn't mean that Nate doesn't have any supporters, because Jorge Masvidal, for one, is fully backing Diaz. And this one has fought Nate in the past, so he knows his shit. And while he did say that Paul had some advantages here, at the end of it all, Nate's toughness is bound to make him the winner. Masvidal also talked about how Nate's in his prime right now, and he might have been out of the scene for a while, but he'll still have the advantage in the cardio department. And in a match that'll last up to 8 rounds, there's a high chance Diaz can tire his opponent out. Because as I mentioned earlier as well, this man can absorb the toughest of strikes and still remain standing.
Nate's definitely gonna have the experience over you, and he's got crazy endurance.
Like you said, his cardio is insane.
He's got great cardio. All the categories that you could have in martial arts, like wrestling being one of them, boxing is something that comes very natural to him, you know? I think he's gonna be a decent boxer.
And that's something Silva also agrees with. Like, Silva knows Jake's serious about this bout, and he really is putting in the effort. He's also got a great coach and team helping him behind the scenes. But all that said, Nate's just way more experienced, and he's got great cardio, like Jorge pointed out. In Silva's words, Nate's a beast. And if you plan on fighting him, you're gonna have to prepare for a full-blown war.
He's a beast, you know. When you go inside to fight with Nick Diaz or Nate Diaz, you need to prepare yourself for war, because the guy's balls is crazy.
So, Nate's gotta be really good if people are defending him against all those odds, right? Because there must be something legends like Francis Ngannou are seeing in the man. That's right, folks, Ngannou's team Nate. When asked about the upcoming matchup in a recent interview, the MMA star did acknowledge that Jake was getting better at proving himself, and you couldn't just count him out, but the Predator's still sticking by Diaz. Enough about the pros though, because the fans have a lot to say too. And let me warn you, it's a real mess in there, especially ever since that training video of Diaz made its way to the internet and caused a frenzy. The video shows Nate practicing his punching combos, and the fans are divided, to say the least. Some of them are in Paul's club here, calling Nate stiff and slow, with one Reddit user writing that maybe he could have had a chance if he was young. But right now, he was simply too old for his feisty 26-year-old opponent. That said though, many other fans were applauding Nate, saying that August 5th, 2023 is going to be a really long night for Jake. One fan also wrote that Jake's credits can't even begin to compete with Nate's career and portfolio, which is far more advanced and simply better. Another one chimed in, adding that the training video clearly shows that Nate's got the power and accuracy to win this fight. And of course, you can't forget his amazing durability, can you? One fan brought in the odds too, saying that people were just underestimating Diaz like they always do. He wrote, "I remember all the noise before the first Conor fight and all the silence after, and well, he's not wrong. Diaz could definitely rise above the ashes here." So there you have it. Fight fans, from fans fighting over who the toughest man is, to the betting books favoring Jake Paul this time around, these were the predictions for the upcoming Diaz versus Paul fight.